Thank you all for coming to my talk. So this is actually interesting. The talk has nothing to do with Python, by the way. It's just thoughts on. Oh, you got me blue M&Ms. You're such a dick. Sorry, I'm not supposed to swear. There's a little. I had a little bit of a scheduling issue getting here because I was keynoting at Blue Hat yesterday, and so I swapped, and I felt so bad being like that high maintenance person, coming up. So I'd like to give a round of applause for Kate wherever she's at for helping me out with the schedule, and everybody else that. And so I just got some blue or just green M&Ms to be high maintenance apparently. But no, a little bit about myself. You did a great intro, and it's been awesome being in the security industry, doing a lot of different things. I started off my career working for the NSA, doing more information warfare, cryptography analysis, signal breaking, all that good stuff. And got out and I started to break things a lot. And what was great is being on the offensive side, I'd walk into companies and I'd destroy them and figure out all the things that were wrong with them. And then I became a chief security officer for a Fortune 1000 company, Diebold. Came in after the voting machines. I always like to throw that out there. But I worked for Diebold, and I finally recognized the reason why it was so challenging to fix a lot of the issues that would come in year after year to go and smash and grab. So today's talk is really to talk a little bit about that and what we can do as an industry to get a little bit better. But I do some work on Mr. Robot. So if you've seen the TV show, like season 1, episode 5, they use the social engineer toolkit to spoof a text message from the person that was in Steel Mountain to get access to the level. And then in season 2, episode 1, they used the social engineer toolkit to deploy crypto wall and stuff like that. And it's funny because I've actually talked to like Christian Slater and all those other folks, and they're like totally paranoid about representing and being hackers. Like they're terrified of us. Like they're like, hey, can you offer some protection? I'm like, man, it doesn't work that way, all right? It's pretty funny. They're like literally terrified of us. And it's funny is that the show has a lot of accurate representation of what we can do in hacking. And that terrifies them even more, that the skits they're actually pretending to do are actually like legitimate stuff that you can actively go and do. So it's always a lot of fun. And I always have the title of one of the world's sexiest men alive. So it's not photoshopped. So if you don't know the story behind this, I was on the Katie Couric show, and they had a up next thing. It said up next, one of the world's sexiest men alive, and it was talking about Benedict Cumberbatch, but they removed the up next for like a half a second or something like that. And so, of course, all my friends on the internet made it go viral and everything else out there. But I think it's true. I'm not gonna. I think they're trying to say something there. That smirk and everything, it's great. But what's interesting about this talk, and the reason why I like giving it is, in this industry, there's so many different demographics. There's application security, which is why we're here today. And even in application security, there's mobile security, there's web app security, there's a whole bunch of other things out there that make up this industry. Everything from exploit research to defense, being on the blue team, being on the red team, being on the purple team. And so you have all these different things, and we're all searching for the best way to fix our individual niche, our area that we're dealing with. We still haven't found that yet. And there's a lot of things out there being touted as being kind of the sure all. In fact, I was coming through the airport last night, and I saw this, and we can all go home now. We fixed the internet apparently. That's Barracuda has a web application firewall that says goodbye data breaches. So we can all leave now and go home. But what's interesting about it is you see a lot of these technologies out there touting and offering a lot of things that they don't necessarily do. And a lot of this, what I'm going to show you today comes from a lot of user interface design and how we actively go out and go after attackers. And so I'll show you some demonstrations about how easy it is to break into corporations based off of design features. And the good one is I actually gave this presentation at just yesterday at Blue Hat. It's a modified version. But I was explaining to Microsoft, like, hey, the reason why we're able to break into your stuff isn't because of your protection mechanisms. You have some great stuff with device guard and ASLR and DEP and everything else. It's how you present information to the user. It's like, hey, do you want to open this up to be able to view the site? Well, yeah, I want to open this up to view the site, but if you hit open, it compromises your whole computer. So it's a UI design issue when it comes to the ease of information that we give our users and everything else. Does anybody here have an Android device? Take it, put it on the table real quick. Just put it on the table. All right, everybody got it on the table? All right. So I did this video yesterday, and anybody have the Pixel? Okay, you probably didn't know this.
Hey, this is Dave. I just got the new Google Pixel XL, and it has the Google Assistant feature on it, and been playing around with it. So far, our phone's awesome. But however, it looks like you can easily bypass the biometric reader by simply just using the Assistant and launching it. Here's an example. Notice my phone is completely locked at the moment. I try to unlock it. Nothing here. Notice I hit my PIN. Can't log in, right? Can't get into the phone. However, so again, still unlocked. Unlocked, right? Okay, Google. Right into the phone.
Now, interesting enough, whose phone just lit up when it happened? Right, well, hang on. So I know that it's the voice activation feature on your phone. How many of you can get anybody to say okay in Google in 2 sentences recorded? Now, by default, the big security issue with this is that it comes on by default on the Google Pixels and all new versions and variations of Android. So an interesting UI design, and you have biometric, which is very single to your thumb, but you also have your voice activation, which is very easy to get somebody to capture okay in Google. So they call, voice lock? It's under settings, security. So if you got the Pixel or any new versions, test it out with your voice and turn it off, because it's when you first set up the phone, it asks you to say okay Google. Notice my phone just locked. Now it's locked. It's locked, huh? So you can't actually shut it off. So interesting design. So if you look at where we're at today as an industry, technology touted as artificial intelligence and machine learning is an interesting concept, because a lot of what we see today from a lot of the technologies doesn't do a lot when it comes to actually prohibiting what we do as attackers. On the offensive side, when I run into new next generation type of software technology, it's usually very trivial to get around. A good example is there's a company out there that touts, machine learning and artificial intelligence. I won't say which one it is or anything like that. I'm not here name bashing or vendor bashing or anything. But most of the time when we do pen tests against this specific piece of technology, we have no idea it's even there. Like we get DA, we get access to all their creds, we extract all their passwords and everything else, and we still have no idea that the technology's there. But yet you have executives that walk out to an airport and say, hey, they know how to stop breaches, or I can stop 99% of the hackers. Or hey, you're going to be hacked next, and all the different type of marketing fear that we see out there. So we have a market really driven off of fear. What's interesting is technology can help with a lot of what we do today, but it doesn't solve all the issues we face. I mean, if you look at just what happened last week or the week before with Myria, we have friggin' toasters that are literally causing internet outages with our DNS providers and everything else that we have out there. If you look at a lot of the symptoms, a lot of these come down to fundamental security practices, everything from ransomware. I mean, ransomware is a technique that we've been using since like when I was a kid on AOL, having people go and download an executable and then infecting their machines, right? I never did that, but if someone were to do that, that's how you would do it back in the 90s, right? And so, ransomware is an issue because you look at what companies are doing, they're still allowing unsigned executables because we have no baselines in our environment. They're allowing executables from temp directories and a lot of other locations, things that we've known have been problematic that malware researchers have done for years and years and years and years. Phishing is the exact same issue. I love this cartoon. Hopefully folks have seen it, but hey, we have all this technology in one corner, which is what we spend all of our millions of dollars on, and then we have Dave in the other corner, right? And Dave's human error, right? And that's the whole downfall of our entire organization, of everything that we see today and all the different breaches that we see. And applications are definitely still a way of getting access to things, but if I know people have Adobe installed or Java installed or just Microsoft installed by default, I know that there's ways for me to actively go and attack individuals that way based off of the type of software that they have. If you look at what actually works, basic concepts do work, and I want to walk you through a specific attack that I did on CNN. And it works really well because of how the user interface is designed, how we're supposed to operate as human beings, and just what is believable and what's not believable. But what we do as attackers is not magic. It doesn't just happen and we have a 0 day and all of a sudden it works. A lot of the stuff that we do is very symptomatic of a larger problem of what we see in most breaches. Look at some of the gaps that we see in security. If you look at kind of the life cycle of an attack, the first thing I do as an attacker is I'll go to like LinkedIn and I'll select 1 or 2 people max, like just 2 people usually, just so I have a fallback pretext that I go after. And what I usually do is we love to brag about ourselves because we have a lot of knowledge that we've obtained over the few years. So we'll talk about the technologies that we know, especially at the current company that we're working at. So let's just say I want to target Trust Attack. And in my resume, I say, hey, I worked on Palo Alto firewalls and Bit9 and Carbon Black. Well, I know now that I need to get around Bit9 and Carbon Black, and I know I need to get around Palo Alto. So I just build my pretext and my attack around that technology. And so I start to build a profile about what I'm going to go after and the individual I'm going after and key roles that they're at in an organization. What's great about trying to find people's email addresses is the only time that you ever have to worry about an email address never being leaked is if, well, so let me back up a second. So is anybody in your, if you Google your company name and an ad address in Google, will you find one person that has probably leaked their email address at one period of time? right? Just one or more. So what's that one email address tell me? The format, right? So is it first dot last name or first initial last name or something else that I can use? Then I go to LinkedIn and I find the specific profile that I want, and I just piece the first name and last name together. Now I have the email address, the title, and all their experience that they've ever used. Plus, to find them on social media, things that they're doing is usually pretty easy as well. So you start to build a profile off of the specific attacks that you want to go and actively do. So that phase is very difficult to detect because I'm using open source intelligence. After that, I can go and buy or build a tool or whatever I want to do to go after it. Buy an exploit kit for 200, 300 bucks on the internet that does it for me. And then the part that we have the toughest time to detect is that initial intrusion. If our endpoint software isn't good enough to detect what we're actively going and doing, we have an issue there, because if we don't detect the initial command and control infrastructure, everything else after that usually goes out the window. Lateral movement, persistence hooks, getting access to the type of data. We have all these different types of technologies like DLP and SIMs and everything, but they're like a massive, massive project to have to deal with, and most of the time we know that they're there, so we don't like sit there and try to add a domain admin to your Active Directory infrastructure because we know you look for stuff like that, right? So we try other methods of going after your organization. So if you don't detect the initial entry point into the initial intrusion into the infrastructure, at that point in time, you're pretty much going blind. So the next slide is one I did on CNN. And what was funny about this one is I've done a few of these, and one of them they didn't even air because it was so bad. One of the producers was like, hey, I want you to hack into my boss, my producer, and we're going to film, and it's going to be hilarious and all this other stuff, right? I'm like, that's cool, sounds good. And so I just get his name, his first and last name, that's all I need. And one thing you can do is, based on the company I was doing with, I did some information about what credit card service they use as a company. And there's a press release that Chase had released that they used, they got a big partnership with this media conglomerate, and that they're now Chase customers and all this other stuff. So I look up this guy, and this guy's in Paris. Let's call him Bob. So Bob's in Paris, and he's doing a photo shoot for this big news organization for some Paris news that was breaking at the time. And so I call up Bob on his phone, and I say, hey, Bob, and I spoof my phone number coming from like an 888 number from the United States. I said, hey, Bob, just want to let you know that we're seeing some weird activity happening. Are you currently traveling in France right now? And Bob, you can hear kind of like a sigh of relief, and Bob's like, yeah, I'm in France right now. Sorry, I forgot to call. I know I'm supposed to call when I travel internationally. I didn't call. I'm like, okay, that's cool, Bob. I just want to go over a couple of these transactions. And I can tell Bob's in a very crowded place. There's a lot of people talking in the background and a lot of other things. What's interesting about that is you can tell Bob's starting to get a little annoyed, like he's busy, he can't really talk to me. And that's a bad position to be at in social engineering, because you need the person to do what you need them to do, and if they're annoyed or agitated, you have a good chance of them hanging up on you. So I had to put him off, what we call off center, or move him off of his space, and have me take control of this conversation. And so I said, okay, Bob, this is only gonna take a few seconds. And so I started naming some really weird places in like Germany and like a whole bunch of other locations for like $1,000, $2,000. And when I mean weird places, like really weird places that you would never, spend a corporate card at in any way, shape, or form. And so Bob starts to get embarrassed on the phone. I'm like, Bob, and Bob's like, no. I was never in Germany. I never did that. I never spent any money on this. And I'm like, all right, Bob, that's fine. We'll just go through these transactions real quick. And Bob, at this point, I have him at this point. He's like, okay. I'm like, Bob, what's your full credit card number? So for security purposes or whatever. And Bob's like, yeah, it's da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, well, what's the CVV? Okay, what's the expiration date? I'm like, okay, what's your social? Give me his full social. I'm like, okay, well. And so I'm saying to the producer, and the producer's jaws drop like this, and she's like, I can't air this. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? Just get his birth date or something? I don't know. So I'm like, well, and I'm like, okay, Bob, let me verify your phone. And I put it on mute. I'm like, do you want me to get anything else? And she's like, I'm like, all right, hang on, let me see if I can go. I'm like, hey, Bob, can I get your birthday? And I kept going on and on and on. I'm like, license plate number, driver's license number. Like, I kept going on for like 15 minutes about things, and they kept giving me everything. I'm like, at this point in time, I'm like, well, what's your wife's social security number? He's like, I don't know it offhand. I'm like, well, it's a backup for. He's like, no, it's a corporate card. I'm like, well, your wife's listed as backup. And she's like, well, let me text her real quick. I'm like, okay. So I felt bad for Bob. So they didn't end up actually airing that one, which was interesting. Here's one I did. Now, what's interesting about this one here is when you do social engineering, you can take advantage of an exploit, but exploits are very difficult because you need to know the environment that you're going after. What versions of an operating system they're running. Are they running Windows 10? Do I got to get around a lot of the protection mechanisms? They're using UAC, blah, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of things that go into going after specific organizations. But what's nice is if you can take advantage of how an operating system is actually designed to work by default, then you're all set. So this attack vector that I use in this one is what we call an HTA attack. It's a old extension that has been in Windows forever. I mean, there's like actually like a book in like 1997. It's one of those like old color books, like 900 pages long. That's like about hacking. And there's like one line in there that says like HTA methods are super awesome to hack, and you can literally hack anybody you want to through HTAs in like 1997 or whatever. And so it still works today, which is great. And what happens is you just trigger an HTA file, and it says, do you want this, in order for this site to work or operate, you need to open this HTA file. It's kind of like a Java applet, and it looks like it's signed by Microsoft, which is awesome. So does anybody gonna ever click open? Like everybody clicks open, right? Everybody. And then you have full access to their computer. It's that easy. It's not an exploit or anything else. And what's interesting with this is I went after a help desk, and help desk's design is to do what? What are help desks there for? To help, right? So you call a help desk and you use them in the capacity that they're designed to operate with. And so, instead of doing things like changing passwords, which require them to trigger something in their mind to say, oh, I need to challenge you because I'm going to be suspicious, and let me see your employee ID or date of birth or last four of your social or whatever you use to challenge those, you don't do something like that. You just take advantage of what they're designed to do as a role. Same thing for human resources or sales. Salespeople are awesome. You can lead to any of the salespeople as long as they're going to get the sale, especially if they're the business to business. Just create a fake business in their same industry vertical and then say you have $1 million you have to blow by Friday, and they will literally click on malware.exe, disable their antivirus, and run it. It's good. As long as they get that cash.
I think of when I say the word hacker. Some creepy dude in a basement? Well, that's a misconception. What if I told you there's a class of hackers who don't just have social skills, they have more social intelligence than anyone you'll ever meet? David Kennedy is one of them. He's what's known as a social engineer, or a people hacker. His craft is to dupe you into doing things and sharing information you probably shouldn't.
Can I just get your credit card number?
Some use it for illegal activity. In David's case, companies pay him to find out if employees are leaving the company vulnerable. He and his team show us how it's done. Step 1, spoof his number so it looks like he's calling from inside the company, and then call tech support.
Hello, you there? Hello?
Hi, this is Ken. How may I help you?
I was wondering if you can take a look at a website I'm trying to get to. It's for a big customer thing I'm working on for Monday, and I can't seem to get to the website from my computer.
Sure. What's the website? I'll see if I can get to it.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate the help. I mean, it could be a stupid thing. I'm really stuck with computers, but so it's www.survey. That's survey -pro.com.
Yeah, I got a prompt to open. I just click open, and I'm at the site now.
Here's what the IT guy doesn't realize. By clicking that link, he's just given David full access to his computer.
Whoa, okay, that's weird. I just hit it and it works. It seems like it's working fine now. Awesome. I don't know what you did, man, but I really appreciate the help.
Hey, no problem. That was easy.
That was it?
We're on his computer right now.
You were able to take over this guy's computer within, I would say, like under 2 minutes.
Under 2 minutes, yeah. Under 2 minutes, took over his entire computer, and think of it as not just his computer, but it's pretty much a downfall of the entire company.
In this case, the company was paying David to hack them and see if their employees would fall for it. They did. To show you this demo, we agreed not to use the company's name.
So that was a fun one to go after. And what's funny about those type of situations, we did the same thing at like DEF CON 16 or whatever. One of my good friends is Kevin Mitnick, and I had listed like 4 numbers to call, and one of our customers gave us permission, and literally we're like live on stage at DEF CON. There's like 3,000 people in the audience. I'm like, listen, I'm gonna call, you all have to be quiet. If anybody makes a peep, I'm kicking you out of the room. And so there's 3,000 people in the audience, and then we did like a live social engineer on stage with Kevin. Kevin, the first one totally bombed out. We had like bad cell reception. The second one didn't work, and I finally got to like the third one, which is like our last one. And finally we got the guy, and we got a shell. We got shells on the screen in the middle of DEF CON. It's one of those really cool things. That's how easy it is, right? And this is an oldie but goodie.
She has 2 teenage daughters.
So have you seen this one? I apologize for going through, but this is one of my favorite ones to go and do. And this is when I was a little bit heavier. So I used to be like 300 and something pounds. So this is Big Dave and I'm Little Dave. And what's funny when you do these ones is, Katie Couric is like, hey, I want you to hack into somebody live in the audience. I'm like, that's cool. I'm like, can I get permission first? Or else I'm gonna go to jail. And she's like, oh yeah. So we got permission first. And when you hack somebody live on stage and you do a bunch of stuff to them, like monitor and eavesdrop on their house, you don't realize the impact it has on somebody personally. I didn't think about that. I was just like, yeah, I'm gonna hack into her stuff and steal all her data and then show it on the screen, and kind of went a little bit bad, but it was good.
Schmidt is here. She has 2 teenage daughters. She lives in Connecticut. And Stephanie, I understand that you believe your computer is unhackable. Why?
Well, it's something that's really on my mind. I'm very concerned about it. I feel like all of my antivirus software is up to date. I've taken a lot of precautions. I have computer consultant who comes into my home to check on these things. And so I really feel
She's got a computer consultant that goes into her home. I messed up there. But who has a computer consultant? Like I'm the computer consultant for my family, but we got, we're all in tech, right? We all probably have computer consultants for our family, right? But who has an actual independent computer consultant? Like, man, Katie must have like the most secure person in the world coming to her house.
I've taken a lot of precautions. I have a computer consultant who comes into my home to check on these things. And so I really feel strongly that we have done everything that possible to try and protect myself and my daughters. I mean, it's something that's really worrisome for me.
Well, that's very impressive because you seem like you're extremely ahead of the curve. So we decided to put David to the test to see if your comfort level with your security is actually warranted. Tell us what happened. How did you do when we gave you the challenge of hacking into Stephanie's computer?
So, Stephanie, I would say, was actually one of the top 5% of what I would say is being most secure. Everything up to date, really locked down, all of those good things. And so I literally had opened my computer up, and less than 10 minutes or so had a fully designed website that looked real in every way and shape or form of a website that you would visit every single day. And I sent an email out, and as soon as I sent the email out, it looks very believable in every way. She clicked the link, and then from there, again, less than 10 minutes of setup time and hacking and all that stuff. I had full access to her computer, her webcam, got around all of her antivirus, everything completely.
You are kidding me.
Wow. So tell us some of the
gosh.
things that you were able to see.
Well, the first thing we did is we enabled her.
Oh my God, that's my.
We enabled her webcam, and we were actually able to monitor everything that was going on in her house. Everything from her daughter working on her computer to Stephanie actually walking through the house itself. We actually enabled the audio as well, so we could actually hear everything that was going on at the same time. So we can listen to.
It gets worse. So we'll leave it at that. But in my head, I'm like, yeah, I'm the awesome hacker, right? And I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, I'm such a horrible person. I don't even realize, but whatever. But anything's believable, as long as you craft something that is legit. So, like a good example is in-person social engineering is also a great one. So this is we were doing an in-person social engineer, and this is one of our guys. We nicknamed him Biebs. He kind of looks like Justin Bieber, and so. We'd have Biebs go out and dress as a security guard and say, hey, our security system isn't working. Can you just, can I get your badge number down and make sure to verify you can, and I'll buzz you in or whatever. It doesn't actually buzz her in. And then he writes her badge number down, and then she's like, well, can I see your badge? Well, she takes the badge off and hands it to him. We have a prox mark in the thing that clones her badge, and then we can walk into the building. So, as long as you have somewhat of a believable story, people will always believe what you're doing. And that's the great part about social engineering that works so effectively. So, she takes her badge off, and now we have access to that. Now, what's great is we walk into the building with that. So we're just actually walking into the building. Or you can just dress up and with balloons and pretend someone has a birthday. And you walk into the building. You just walk right past because the balloons are blocking the view. This is one of the ones we did at DerbyCon. Got permission from the Hyatt to go and do this. Where's that other? So you can use e-cigarettes. You may hear smoke e-cigarettes or anything like that. You can use that to pretty much get into any building you want to just by blowing smoke through the cracks of the door because it triggers the rec sensor on the top. So there's a sensor on the top there, and it looks for motion, so it detects motion, and so you're just blowing cigarette smoke to it. Or e-cig smoke, and it opens the door for you. Or you can just use whiskey. This is one of my good friends, Deviant, the next one here. Deviant was walking down the street and saw one of these open, and he's awesome at physicals, but.
So we're locked, but there's a rec sensor up there.
Whatever, right? I mean, what's funny about the e-cig one is the first time we were trying it, we got permission from the Hyatt to go and do it, but it was the area where all the cooks are at. And so I'm blowing e-cigarette smoke, and one of the guys from the Hyatt is sitting next to me giggling and laughing. And I open it up, and the whole room is full of smoke, right? And there's 3 cooks there, they're looking at me all terrified because there's smoke literally coming through the walls, and the whole room's full of smoke. So I'm like, oh, just pretend it didn't happen, close the door slowly. We can look at what happens today. Humans continue to be our most challenging avenue, and that's why we have to develop a lot of our apps around that to understand that humans will do that. I mean, the funny part is, it's not funny, but not everybody's a nerd when it comes to security. Good example is my grandma called me up about 2 weeks ago, and she was like, hey, Dave, you'd be proud of me. I'm like, oh, what'd you do, Grandma? Not very tech savvy. She's like, well, the Microsoft guy called me and said my antivirus is out of date, so I was able to work with him and give him access to my computer, and then I gave him my credit card, and I got the whole new antivirus stuff up to date. I'm like, Grandma, you own a Mac, first of all. I'm like, you don't even have Windows. There's no Microsoft at all on your thing. And she's like, oh, really? I'm like, all right, let's cancel your credit card. I'm like, first, to call me. Like, I'm the kingpin in our family. You call for technology, right? You call me anytime there's something wrong, right? And she unfortunately didn't call me. So, but that's a good example of what we're trying to face right now in the security industry is the people piece of it. So if you look at fixing humans, I think it requires 3 major things. You look at the building blocks or foundation of it. A lot of it comes down to education, but it's a little bit different. I'll talk about those here in just a second. The basics and technology. Look at education. What we're typically taught in most of our companies is the click ratio piece of it. So we get something like a provider that sends out phishing campaigns, and you go from 70% to 20% or 30% or 40%, and then you get a certain level that you're okay with, and after that, your phishing goes up based off of how well your fish is, or goes down based off how awful your fish is. Those aren't accurate portrayals, because as an attacker, if I create a fantasy that's really believable, you're going to have one person that goes and actively clicks that link. It's just always going to happen. So your security program has to be designed to understand that, and that it needs to understand that a person is always going to click on something. Hopefully, the education piece gives the person the ability to communicate with the security team and say, hey, something's messed up here. We need to actually go and do it. But to me, education means training users on the actual technology itself. Both personal and professional. I was at Diebold, the biggest success we had for having users understand technology is when we could relate it to them personally. Like, hey, here's how to secure a kid's Facebook. Here's how to do your home Wi-Fi, that type of stuff. And they started to understand the reasons why we were doing certain things. And that had a big impact overall on how we actively went and did everything. So a huge advocate of education when it comes to what people do and how you actively interact with them. The basics are interesting, because most of the stuff that we see today, most of the breaches that we see today doesn't come from something super sophisticated. We hear a lot about state-sponsored attacks. We hear about Russia hacking into the DNC with 0 days, and Microsoft and Google combating because they released a 0 day early, and all this other stuff because of Russia and China and all this other stuff. I don't remember the last time I had to actively go and run an exploit against the company to get access to it. I just don't remember having to do that it's been years since I've had to actually use an exploit to get after a company. Do we know what the main method I still get into this day? Passwords. A password of some sort, like summer 2016, winter 2016, password 1, company name 123. So maybe you're like, I'm changing my password real quick. Things that are very predictable. And what's awesome about that is one of the methods I used for a long time, it's now very public out there, is you could use Microsoft, and even with two-factor authentication, you could circumvent it with EWS, or EWS and ECP. So essentially, if you have two-factor authentication over your AWA, you can still authenticate with you. You haven't seen that, by the way. Black Hills Information Security had a really good post on this, and you can literally circumvent all two-factor authentication on Office 365, as well as Exchange OWA as well. And what was nice about that is you can actually compromise users just by single factor, right? And then what you could do from there is there's what are called rules within OWA. And you can push rules down that say, hey, when that person logs in and opens up Outlook, I want you to push down a PowerShell script to run that is a backdoor into the machine and get a shell on a machine. So you can compromise direct users through OWA just by going through and using that method as well. So it's a major issue, but I've been using that for years. What's been great is like use like the LinkedIn data breaches. And you just grab the company name and match that up, and you just go after those users and go after those user accounts. And all of a sudden, you usually have 1 or 2 hits off of a company based off of password reuse. So it's usually an easy way to get into an infrastructure just through application attacks, through something that is supposed to be protecting us through two-factor. And by the way, that's the way two-factor works on most of Microsoft products. A lot of people try to implement two-factor authentication in their environment, like RDP and things like that, right? They don't think about the lower level programming or lower level protocols like RPC or NetBIOS or SMB that I can use and still authenticate with like PSExec and other things that don't have two-factor authentication on it. Or PowerShell remoting is another good example. Doesn't have two-factor authentication enabled on it. So you have the ability to circumvent most two-factor authentication solutions in environments based off of the protocols that you're using to actively go and run it. Some of the things that actually stopped me pretty difficult-wise on this, that one group policy on the top is like the best thing you could ever implement in your entire environment if you can do it. So it's deny access to this computer from the network, and you put the local administrators group in there. And so what happens is Bob, and let's just say I'm Bob and I have really, or our entire company has really bad permissions. Like we have a lot of local admins that are still running around like crazy. When does Bob, that in his own individual machine that he's a local admin in, need to ever log into anybody in other workstations machines as admin? Rare, right? You might have certain use cases or edge cases, like maybe you have a help desk, functionality, but you can put that in there, but it's not a local admin. What you can do is add the local administrators group to that group policy, and it literally stops most of the lateral movement stuff that you see today. A good example of that is when I compromise a machine and I get access to the underlying operating system, I extract hashes, or I'll grab Kerberos tokens, or grab clear text passwords out of memory if you have that enabled still, and I'll use that information, and that machine's usually the same on another machine. So I just move from that one machine to the other machine to another machine to another machine. But if I have a local admin hash, it does me no good with that group policy setting. I can't move from one machine to the other because you deny it through the network. So even if I compromise that one system, it really limits what I'm actually able to do as an attacker. There's also LAPS. If you're not familiar with that, it's a Microsoft tool. It basically randomizes all of the local accounts on the machines so that, and it stores them in Active Directory. So your help desk, you can just give permission to through group policy to see those passwords, and then you can log into the machines themselves, but every password is completely different in your environment. Another great one, privilege account management still to this day happens to be the easiest way. A great example is I always go after DAs, and I just go after the workstation account. Usually the workstation account is the same password as a DA account, or just like one variant off. Or they use, like right-click run as administrator, and then the Kerberos token's valid on that machine, and then you can just move from there to other systems. So there's a lot of ways around that, but privilege access management is another one. Device guard is awesome. That's a new feature within Windows 10 if you're not familiar. It's kind of like App Locker on steroids. It's basically saying that you have a trusted level of security in your environment. If you have things that are non-code signed applications or things that you haven't seen before, don't actively go and allow it. Another good method, suspicious process network connections. Does Reg SVR32 or Run DLL32 ever need to communicate with the internet? No. Why is it ever allowed on your network in any way, shape, or form? Ever. Like if you see Run DLL32 or Reg SVR32 communicating to the internet, well, there's actually some really crummy printer drivers that every once in a while we use Run DLL32. They actually use like attacker methods that like China uses with like plugx. Like I think Canon uses the same thing or something like that. So it's really friggin' weird. But then you have like Reg SVR32, which is a bypass for application whitelisting. And Reg SVR32 is actually proxy aware. So you can actually go and download what are called SCT files from the internet that don't have to have that extension, by the way, and directly execute code in memory without ever touching the disk. And so that's a by default thing on there. There's Casey Smith released that one. He actually released one at Blue Hat called Tracker. Tracker is another one where you can basically import a DLL directly into memory through Tracker. There's Event Viewer you can use to get remote code execution. These are things that you need to be cognizant of as you're actively going and doing it. Another good example is PowerShell. We're starting to get good, or starting to at least move into the ability to detect PowerShell, right? In some ways. Well, what's interesting is that most people look for encoded command, right? But encoded command, there's 12 different variations of encoded command. There's -E, there's -EC, there's -EN, there's -ENC. Keep going. So there's 12 different variations that we actually need to look for encoded command, or IEX, or invoke expression, or other methods that typically hackers will use to go and download it and execute off the network. And I go back to the 1995 days with Marcus Rainham and building the first firewall or whatever. He said back then is like, hey, we should probably segment sales from marketing and marketing from IT and IT from everybody else and do this whole network segmentation thing. And the whole industry is like, yeah, that's cool, but that's like a lot of work. So we're just going to keep everything open. We're still paying for that stuff today. Everybody we go into is like the M&M syndrome, hard on the outside, soft on the inside. So you compromise Bob in sales. Now Bob in sales has access to Mary in IT. It has full communications and ports and protocols. Does Bob in sales ever need to talk to Mary in IT with SMB or RDP or anything else ever? Never. No, that doesn't happen. It's not a business process that we actively go and use. Or do we need full ports and protocols on all servers and workstations? No, we don't. So network segmentation works really well. One of my super awesome favorite ones are honey tokens. This totally messes us up as attackers. by the way. So there's a PowerShell script. There's two PowerShell scripts that you can go and grab. One of them is what's called invoke run as, and it's from Fuzzy Security. And you can use that as what we call a honey token. What happens is, what I would do is I would create a domain admin on your domain controller and make it like a super complex character password, like a 100-character password, write it down or print it and then put it in a safe and never use it again. And then what you can do with invoke run as is it's very similar to, everybody familiar with like the net only command with netuse? What it does is it actually sprays credentials into memory to be used at a later date, so it doesn't have to go and authenticate each time. And so what you can do with invoke run as is you can say, hey, create a token with this username and this password and just store it there, but don't actually authenticate. And so what will happen is you'll have a domain admin that's legitimately there in your domain controllers and a fake password that does not match the same one as a domain controller one, and you run that as a scheduled task in your environment as a PowerShell command across all of your networks. If you ever see a failed login attempt with that, that's really bad, right? You know someone is in your environment right away. And by the way, that's something I would go after as an attacker. If like I see a domain admin Kerberos token or a domain admin username and password in memory, you better believe I'm going after that domain admin token, right? So you should never see that happen. There's also another technique that we use called LLMNR NBNS. It's called multicast, local link multicast resolution protocol, or NBNS, NetBIOS name services. Those are two protocols, and what will happen is on a machine, and this is by default, by the way, your group policy has it on and enabled by default. What will happen is when your computer goes and says, hey, I need to map a drive from some sort of scheduled task that we have, or we're just logging into our computer, or we need to go to a file share in some way, shape, or form. It'll say, hey, computer, where's file share 1? I don't see it in my cache. Oh, I need to ask around in my local subnet to see if it's here to cut down on bandwidth in my DNS servers. And I'll say, hey, where's file server 1? And the attackers will be like, yep, I'm file server 1. And it's like, oh, okay, well, here's my credentials, and passes it to you. It's like magic credentials in your environment, right? And what's great about that technique is it passes that NCM v2, but if you're using anything less than about a 12 or anything less than a 12-character password, it's pretty easy to break. So it's very easy for us as attackers to go and do it. But you can find those in your environment. You can create, and that's what Ben created. It's under github.com, Ben0xa. It's called PowerShell Defense Tool. What it does is it actually sprays fake LLMNR and NBNS across your network so you can run them as scheduled tasks. And there's actually a specific event ID that you can look for in your SIMs. I think it's 4624 or 4648, sorry, 4648. 4648, what it says is explicit credentials were used to log into the remote system. So if you give it a fake username and a fake password that you know is not good on your domain, should that username and password ever be used in your environment at all? No. So what Responder is saying, or Invade or whatever they're using for the tool, is saying like, I'm accepting anything. Just come connect to me. Yep, I'm that person. So you can actually see that event log ID, and you can actually detect those in your environment as it actually happens just by that specific event log ID, which is really neat. So two really cool techniques that mess me up as an attacker. On the technology front, if you look at technology, this is an interesting one because you can augment users with technology. And this is probably why we're all here today, is talking about how do we continue to produce secure code with a lot of the things that we see out there. And if you look at how fast technology is running, I mean, in order to keep up with how fast we need to produce, we came out with Agile and DevOps, a full extension of the development lifecycle of saying, okay, from the developers all the way to the architecture and those that push everything out to prod, that's one arm of our business that can allow code to be produced in a very efficient and effective manner. And that's great, by the way. I think that's fantastic. I think security should be part of that, not be the roadblock in any way. Like, hey, oh, wait. We need 3 months of testing in QA, and we're going to need to send you some showstoppers that go back to your environment, and then 6 months later you can get this minor rev that's an icon change into production, okay? It can't work that way anymore. We have to be able to get a hold of that and work with the organizations to do Agile. And so that comes to a lot of things. There's a really great talk on Agile automation and security out there. I recommend it's from Jimmy Bird from DerbyCon. Just look up Jimmy B-Y-R-D and DerbyCon. It has a lot of good automation testing. But we create these things, we created automation testing and bug bounty programs that help us out a lot with it. Now, what's interesting in bug bounty programs, especially the larger ones like Apple and everything else, is they can never compete with the black market. There's no way to effectively go and do it. I mean, a good example is an iPhone bug right now is going for 1.5 million on the private market. How much does it go for Apple? I think it's 100K. It might be 200. Is it 200? 20? Oh, did it? Oh, no. So that was for something. So there's different tiers for that, but yeah, I think you're right. My previous slide did have it. Yeah. Probably should read those ahead of time, right? Thank you for actually reading. That's great. But the local privilege exploit that was used just recently, Microsoft doesn't even pay a bounty for that because it's not a specific method for getting around their preventive mechanisms that they have out there. I like Chris Nickerson. He had a good thing. A bug bounty is like going to a bar, walking in and leaving a buck knife on the table and saying, first person who performs successful open heart surgery on me gets $50. And I like that because why that's a good example. I love Chris. Why that's a great example is, while you're going to have somebody that may be able to perform open heart surgery, chances are they're probably not going to risk their career to perform open heart surgery for $50 on the table for you. They're going to go and do it somewhere else. Or you're going to get somebody that's going to grab, start to perform open heart surgery and kill you and organ harvest all your stuff and then sell it on the black market for much more. Or you're going to have variations of that. You're going to have results some way or another, but the results vary. So 98% of the people that would perform open heart surgery on you are going to kill you, but you might find 2% that actually have a really good amount that actually can go and help you with that. So bug bounty is an interesting one because by the way, I'm an advocate of it. I don't think it's a bad thing. Your results may vary based off of what you actually go and do. If you look at most of the hacks, most of them wouldn't even qualify for bug bounty programs in the first place that we see out there. So you look at this, and there's actually a split in this industry right now around those that will sell to the black market or the private market, whether it's government sponsored stuff. The NSA is paying millions of bucks for all of these 0 days. So is Russia and China and everybody else. So are private markets that are actually out there. So there's a big split in the industry right now around that and money and actually going and doing the right thing in the security industry. And a lot of what we see today is due to our own issues internally. Like a good example is driving Jeeps off the road, right? Or what we call stunt hacking, going off and doing things that cause major media blitzes. And by the way, every time we do that, it's like we're screaming, yelling, and throwing tangents in the security industry. And what's interesting is every time lawmakers look at us and they're like, hey, we need to get a hold of those guys because they're dangerous. Like we need to put security ramifications and put people in jail when they go and actively don't do this. And they literally can just kill the whole security research market overnight. So we have a lot of responsibility on what this comes. We actually have to be adults when we do responsible disclosure and stuff like that. It's no longer like, hey, we're going to DEF CON, there's 100 people, it's 20,000 people now. We release a 0 date impacts like everybody in the industry because we now have technology across everything. So the security researchers are where a lot of this is at today. And this is really the future of what we're dealing with in this industry. The security researchers are really the forefront of what we actively do. And those are the people that aren't necessarily solely relying off of money, but the folks that actually release bypass techniques to Microsoft and get the $100,000 or $200,000. That's a drop in the bucket for what they can make in the private market. So security researchers are a lot of where we're today. A good example is Matthew Graber. He's one of the most top, for me, he's I'm a fanboy of Matthew Graber. Releases PowerShell techniques all the time, but he works on defensive capabilities. Jared DeMott, who figured all the Emmet bypasses and worked with Microsoft to go and fix them. Ben 10, who's the scripts that I put out there today. John Strand, who released the two-factor authentication bypass, but worked with Microsoft ahead of time to try to do responsible disclosure. But when he wasn't getting the results that he needed to push and force Microsoft's hand, and now they're forcing to go and fix two-factor authentication. Sean Metcalf, who just releases every single time how you can defend your Active Directory environments. Jeff Snover that actually wrote PowerShell. It was at DerbyCon. Lee, who also helps on the PowerShell stuff. Or even people like my dad. My dad was in the audience yesterday for Blue Hat, which is really neat. He teaches security for school districts. He's a head sysadmin for one of our largest school districts, and him and I go back and forth, and it's cool because every time I got a new exploit, I just go to his environment and test it out on it and see how effective it is. So it's like a great relationship. I'm like, Dad, I just owned you. And he's like, yeah, you did. I'm gonna stop you next time, right? Or all the other countless researchers that are out there that continue to try to dedicate themselves. That's how we make this industry better. And that's how we all work together, whether it's on the application security side or finding a mobile bug, or going and actively going and doing something that makes an impact some way. That's what we can do to change this industry. And that's us growing up. It has nothing to do with being commercial or anything else. It just means growing up instead of flying planes sideways and everything else that ends up happening on the news that you typically see. So last, but it's you that makes the difference. I like this quote: "Do something today that your future self will thank you for tomorrow." Right? And I love that quote because if you look at what we're here to do, it's to hopefully change something and make something better. Whether it's in a company or a company that we start ourselves, or just sharing our resources that we can leverage to learn off of one another. That's what I end up seeing as being one of the most important things in the industry. And if you look at it, people focus on making the industry better, the industry will become a better place. There's no question about it. And so what's great about this industry and what I love seeing is how we've grown over the time to actively go and try to build those types of things. Does anybody have any questions? That's all I had. Anybody have any questions? Threw a lot at you, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, give me the 5-minute mark. I'm like, I got like 6 more slides to go. Sorry. Any questions? Thank you.